I find myself compelled to address an event that the financial press has largely ignored, but which I believe represents one of the most significant challenges to American monetary hegemony since the collapse of Bretton Woods. Mexico's announcement that it will repatriate its entire gold reserves from foreign vaults, approximately 120 tons valued at nearly $8 billion, and Trump's subsequent diplomatic eruption reveal fault lines in the global financial architecture that threaten to reshape the international order more profoundly than most observers comprehend. This is not simply another trade dispute or monetary policy adjustment. This is the beginning of what I fear will be the terminal phase of dollar-based global dominance. When President Claudia Sheinbaum announced on December 15th that Mexico would reclaim physical possession of its gold reserves currently stored in London, New York, and Ottawa, she employed language that transcended technical monetary policy. Mexican gold belongs in Mexican soil, she declared, held by Mexican institutions, backing Mexican sovereignty. The symbolism was unmistakable, but the economic implications run far deeper than nationalist rhetoric. For 7 decades, emerging economies have stored their precious metal reserves in Western financial centers as both collateral for international borrowing and insurance against domestic political instability. When major economies begin repatriating these assets, they signal fundamental shifts in global power distribution and trust relationships. The immediate trigger for Mexico's decision appears to be the Trump administration's renewed threats to weaponize financial access as a tool of foreign policy. Following Trump's December 8th warning that Mexico would face devastating economic consequences unless it accepted American immigration enforcement operations on Mexican territory, Sheinbaum's government apparently concluded that maintaining gold reserves in institutions subject to American judicial and regulatory authority represented an unacceptable vulnerability. The timing is not coincidental. It reflects a broader calculation that the risks of American financial coercion now exceed the benefits of participating in dollar-dominated reserve management systems. I observe that Trump's reaction to Mexico's announcement reveals both the strategic importance of this decision and the psychological fragility of American leadership facing imperial decline. His December 18th social media outburst, threatening immediate and severe sanctions against Mexico for economic aggression against American financial institutions, exposed the contradictions inherent in attempting to maintain hegemonic control through coercion rather than consent. When the leader of the world's dominant economy must threaten sanctions to prevent other countries from controlling their own assets, the empire's foundations have already begun crumbling. The historical precedents for gold repatriation movements illuminate why this development should alarm anyone concerned about global financial stability. Germany's multi-year effort to repatriate gold from New York and Paris, completed in 2017, signaled European concerns about American reliability following the 2008 financial crisis and subsequent aggressive monetary policies. Venezuela's failed attempt to repatriate gold from London vaults, blocked by British authorities citing political concerns, demonstrated how precious metal storage can become a tool of international coercion. Turkey's successful repatriation of 220 tons in 2018 reflected Erdogan's broader strategy of reducing dependence on Western financial institutions following diplomatic confrontations. Mexico's decision carries far greater systemic significance because of the country's deep integration with American economic systems. Unlike Germany or Turkey, Mexico participates in NAFTA-based supply chains that require constant dollar-denominated transactions. Mexican banks hold substantial dollar reserves, while Mexican corporations maintain extensive dollar borrowing relationships. When an economy this interconnected with American financial systems chooses to reduce institutional exposure through gold repatriation, it suggests that trust in American monetary stewardship has eroded beyond repair among even close allies. The technical challenges of gold repatriation reveal the complexity of unwinding decades of financial integration. Moving 120 tons of gold requires sophisticated logistics, insurance arrangements, and storage infrastructure that Mexico has been quietly developing since 2019. The Bank of Mexico's expansion of vault capacity in its underground facilities, construction of new security systems, and training of specialized personnel represent preparations that extend far beyond symbolic gesturing. These investments signal long-term strategic thinking about monetary independence that should concern American policymakers who depend on foreign reserve holdings to maintain dollar liquidity. I notice that Mexico's announcement coincides with accelerating de-dollarization efforts across the global south, creating what monetary economists recognize as a cascade effect, where individual decisions aggregate into systemic transformation. China's bilateral trade agreements with Brazil, Argentina, and Russia increasingly bypass dollar settlements. India's oil purchases from Iran occur through rupee-ruble arrangements that exclude Western banking systems. Saudi Arabia's acceptance of Chinese yuan for oil payments breaks decades of petrodollar recycling that has anchored American monetary dominance. When added to Mexico's gold repatriation, these developments suggest coordinated preparation for post-dollar international monetary arrangements. The economic implications of widespread gold repatriation extend far beyond symbolic sovereignty assertions, because physical gold represents the only monetary asset that exists outside digital financial networks subject to American control. Unlike foreign exchange reserves held in treasury securities or bank deposits, gold stored domestically cannot be frozen, confiscated, or weaponized through financial sanctions. As geopolitical tensions escalate, and American foreign policy becomes increasingly unpredictable, rational economic actors naturally seek assets immune from political manipulation. Gold repatriation represents insurance against financial warfare disguised as monetary policy technical adjustment. Trump's threats of sanctions against Mexico for controlling its own gold reserves expose the desperate extremes to which declining hegemons resort when facing challenges to their dominance. Historical analysis reveals that imperial powers in terminal phases consistently overreact to symbolic challenges, treating minor sovereignty assertions as existential threats requiring maximum response. The British Empire's paranoid reactions to colonial independence movements, the Soviet Union's military interventions against Eastern European autonomy efforts, and now American sanctions threats against Mexican gold policy follow identical patterns of imperial psychology, unable to distinguish between tactical setbacks and strategic collapse. The Federal Reserve's predicament becomes acute when major economies reduce their exposure to dollar-based reserve systems because American monetary policy depends critically on foreign demand for treasury securities and dollar deposits. When Mexico, Germany, Turkey, and potentially other nations physically control their gold reserves rather than holding dollar-denominated assets, the Fed loses important sources of demand for American debt. This forces the central bank to choose between maintaining monetary credibility through restricted money supply or accommodating fiscal deficits through money creation that risks inflation and currency degradation. I realize that Mexico's gold repatriation decision reflects broader calculations about American political stability that extend beyond current trade disputes or immigration enforcement conflicts. When allied governments begin questioning whether American institutions will remain predictable, lawful, and trustworthy over extended time horizons, they naturally seek to reduce exposure to potential American policy volatility. The Trump administration's erratic use of emergency declarations, arbitrary tariff impositions, and threats of financial warfare against allies suggests to rational observers that American policy frameworks may no longer provide the stability required for long-term economic relationships. The global financial architecture constructed after 1971 depends fundamentally on foreign willingness to hold dollar assets as stores of value and mediums of international exchange. When major economies choose physical gold over dollar reserves, they signal declining confidence in American monetary stewardship and growing preference for assets outside American political control. This preference shift creates what economists recognize as a network effect, where reduced participation by some actors makes the system less valuable for remaining participants, potentially triggering accelerating abandonment of dollar-based arrangements. China's strategic calculations regarding Mexico's gold repatriation deserve particular attention because Beijing has consistently supported regional de-dollarization efforts while expanding bilateral trade relationships that bypass American financial intermediation. Chinese banks have provided technical assistance for Latin American gold storage facilities, while Chinese companies offer alternative payment systems for regional trade. Mexico's decision to repatriate gold aligns with Chinese strategic objectives by reducing Latin American dependence on American financial institutions and creating precedents for other regional economies to follow. The domestic political implications within Mexico reveal how gold repatriation can strengthen government legitimacy while reducing vulnerability to foreign economic pressure. Public opinion surveys show overwhelming support for controlling national gold reserves domestically, with 78% of respondents expressing approval for Sheinbaum's decision. This popular backing provides political insulation against American pressure while demonstrating how monetary sovereignty can become a powerful tool for domestic political coalition building. When governments can credibly claim to be protecting national assets from foreign control, they gain legitimacy that enhances their capacity for independent policymaking. American corporate interests face mounting complications as Mexico reduces integration with dollar-based financial systems because supply chain relationships depend on predictable currency and payment arrangements. Manufacturing companies with Mexican operations must adapt to alternative payment systems, while financial institutions lose profitable reserve management relationships. The cumulative effect creates pressure on American business lobbies to oppose administration policies that accelerate de-dollarization, potentially generating domestic political tensions between foreign policy objectives and commercial interests. The timing of Mexico's announcement, occurring during American domestic political turmoil and constitutional crisis, suggests strategic calculation about optimal moments for asserting sovereignty against imperial powers. When dominant nations face internal instability, their capacity for international coercion diminishes while their reactions become more desperate and less effective. Mexico's leadership apparently concluded that American political dysfunction creates windows of opportunity for reducing financial dependence without triggering effective retaliation. I observe three potential scenarios emerging from Mexico's gold repatriation decision, each carrying profound implications for international monetary arrangements and American global influence. The first involves successful Mexican transition to gold-backed monetary independence that inspires similar decisions by other Latin American nations, creating a regional monetary bloc outside American control. The second features escalating American economic pressure against Mexico that damages bilateral trade relationships while demonstrating to other nations the costs of challenging dollar hegemony. The third scenario encompasses broader systemic breakdown, where multiple simultaneous challenges to dollar dominance overwhelm American capacity for effective response, triggering accelerated transition to multipolar monetary arrangements. Each scenario demands recognition that monetary sovereignty represents the foundation of genuine political independence in the modern international system. Nations that control their own monetary assets maintain policy autonomy, while countries dependent on foreign financial systems remain subject to external pressure and potential coercion. Mexico's gold repatriation decision, regardless of immediate consequences, establishes the principle that emerging economies need not accept permanent financial subordination to maintain international economic relationships. The Federal Reserve's policy options become increasingly constrained as foreign gold repatriation reduces demand for dollar assets, while domestic fiscal deficits require continued monetary accommodation. The central bank must choose between maintaining international confidence through restrictive policies that risk domestic recession or protecting domestic economic growth through expansionary policies that accelerate dollar depreciation. This impossible choice between international monetary credibility and domestic political stability characterizes the final phases of imperial monetary dominance throughout history. The technical aspects of Mexico's gold repatriation reveal sophisticated preparation that extends far beyond spontaneous policy responses to American pressure. Bank of Mexico officials have spent 4 years developing domestic storage infrastructure, training security personnel, and establishing assay capabilities that ensure authentic gold verification without foreign institutional dependence. These preparations suggest long-term strategic planning rather than reactive nationalism, indicating that Mexican leadership views reduced dollar dependence as essential for future economic sovereignty, regardless of immediate political circumstances. Corporate America's exposure to Mexican de-dollarization creates pressure points that complicate Washington's response options because major American companies depend on stable bilateral trade relationships. General Motors' Mexican manufacturing operations require predictable currency arrangements, while financial institutions like J.P. Morgan Chase maintain profitable relationships with Mexican banks that could deteriorate if monetary integration decreases. These corporate interests create domestic political constraints on aggressive American responses. The international legal implications of American threats against Mexican gold repatriation expose fundamental contradictions in the liberal international order that the United States claims to champion. International law clearly establishes sovereign rights over national assets, while American threats to sanction Mexico for controlling its own gold violate basic principles of state sovereignty. When hegemonic powers abandon legal principles to maintain dominance, they delegitimize the entire institutional framework they previously used to justify their leadership. European responses to Mexico's gold repatriation decision provide crucial indicators of Atlantic Alliance cohesion because European support for American financial pressure against Mexico would signal continued Western unity, while European neutrality would indicate growing independence from American monetary policy preferences. Preliminary statements from European central bank officials expressing understanding for national gold storage preferences suggest that European monetary authorities recognize legitimate concerns about American financial weaponization. The broader Latin American context reveals that Mexico's gold repatriation occurs within regional movements toward monetary independence that include Brazilian real yuan trade agreements and Argentine peso ruble arrangements. When combined with Mexico's decision, these developments suggest coordinated regional strategy to reduce dollar dependence rather than isolated Mexican policy choice. Financial market reactions to Mexico's gold repatriation announcement reveal investor recognition that monetary sovereignty movements represent serious challenges to existing international financial arrangements. Gold prices increased 2.3% in the week following Mexico's announcement, while peso strength against the dollar reached 6-month highs as currency markets interpreted gold repatriation as signal of monetary credibility enhancement. I conclude with the observation that Mexico's gold repatriation represents far more than technical monetary policy adjustment or symbolic sovereignty assertion. It signals the beginning of comprehensive challenges to American financial hegemony that will reshape global economic relationships regardless of immediate American responses. The emperor's clothes, the faith-based monetary system that has sustained American global dominance since 1971, are becoming increasingly transparent to foreign observers who recognize that paper promises backed by political threats cannot indefinitely substitute for real assets under sovereign control. History suggests that when allied nations begin questioning the fundamental trustworthiness of imperial institutions, the empire has entered its terminal phase. The gold is coming home, and with it, the illusions that sustained American global financial dominance are coming to an end.